Okay, I've been letting things dry here for a few minutes, and I'm going to start taking off my weights. And I had the leading edge taped to the table here, so I'm going to peel off that tape carefully without ripping the plans or breaking the leading edge. This is why you don't want to tape it down too well. It can be difficult to take off. Also, after it had set for a little bit, I added a little dab of glue where each trailing edge of the rib meets the trailing edge stick, because there's not a lot of contact area there. I was worried that it didn't quite have enough glue touching wood. But now this whole thing is a little bit glued to the paper here, but I can just give it a little pull off of the paper. Just lifting it up gently at each joint. This corner is pretty good there. And I have a nice finished wing structure, and we can see that the outer ribs are each angled inward a little bit, so that we are ready to make dihedral when we join the wings together. Both wingtips will bend upwards to try to get a little bit more roll stability on it. So I'm going to set this guy aside for the moment over here, and we're going to build another wing the exact same way. So you should have at least 2 long sticks left. And again, we want to go all the way to the very edge of the wing, to the end of the last rib. We don't want to end between the ribs. We actually want to go to the very edge of the rib. This guy's pretty dry now too. We'll move that. So all the way to the outer lines on the wing. If you mess that up again, you'll just be 3 millimeters short on your wingspan. And then you can do it on purpose on the other wing if you want, so that you're symmetrical. And I'm going to tape my leading edge in place again. Not too thoroughly, so it's easy to pull up later. And my ribs I already punched out before, so I'm going to pull those back up here. And I'm going to put the higher density ones at the ends, because those are where it's going to need to be stronger. And I'm going to put the lower density ones through the middle here. And I'm going to start with the end ribs so that I can get the trailing edge positioned correctly. If we put it right on the plans, it should be about right, but we don't want any gaps between the rib and the trailing edge stick, so this way I can butt it up right against it. Just a little bit of pressure, I don't want to snap anything. And we have to use our dihedral guide again for the outer ribs. So we're going to angle the rib towards the other end. So again, the top ribs are angled, the end ribs are angled towards each other at the top. I'm going to do the same thing on the other wingtip here. If you put your glue cap upside down on the table, it's easy to stuff your glue back into it when you're done. Stick for the trailing edge is a hair long. I've got a little bit sticking out there. I might need to trim that off later. Using my dihedral guide, I angle the rib inward. If you're using the wood glue, it's a little bit runnier than this, so it doesn't stay in place quite as well while you're working. So that's why I like this cement. But again, the fumes from this are dangerous, so make sure you're in a well-ventilated area. And then the middle ribs I'm just going to start putting in between, and these ones we're going to set perpendicular, or a nice vertical angle, or right angle to the rest of the wing. And again, I'm just going to use whatever's handy here to hold things nice and flat, so it's not bulging up off of the table. Hope you guys like our tablecloth here. It doesn't exactly make it easy to see what I'm doing, but hopefully over the paper you can see fairly well. last rib here. Again, sometimes things move up and down a little bit, so we'll weigh this down a little right here. While our second wing is drying, we need to make the wing saddle. This is a very high wing plane, so it's called a parasol wing, where the wing is going to be set above the fuselage, and that's what our little short sticks are for. This guy, and this guy, we're going to glue together to hold our wing up. And it shows you that on the plans here, but because this is all just right angles, we're basically making a large rectangular trough, or U. You don't really need to build it over the plans if you don't want to, but then we're going to glue it to these other balsa strips here that'll help reinforce it. So I'll start out just by putting a little bit of glue on each end of the long one. And then pressing up the shorter ones against it. We want to make sure these are pretty much a right angle there. It doesn't need to dry very long before we attach the reinforcements to it. So as long as it's not moving around all over the place, I can start gluing on our side reinforcements to it. And it's just the narrower half is going to have glue on it. So if I just smear around a thin layer of it here on that half is going to just cover up the long piece. And again, the plans show you how it's laid out, but you don't have to build over this if you don't want to. In fact, I can just pick up this thing right now and flip it over and do the same with the other piece on the other side. I can just smear some glue across the narrower side and glue that on so it lines up with its mirror on the other side. If your balsa wood is warped a little bit, it might try to kind of split apart on you, and you can just hold it together with your fingers and kind of clamp it, or you can set something heavy on top of it to hold it in place, like your tape, and just have it squash it till it's dry. And that's going to hold our wing above the fuselage. And going back to our fuselage here, if our dowel is fairly dry and our stabilizer and fin are fairly dry here, we can go ahead and attach the stabilizer and fin to the fuselage, but to tell if it's vertical or not can be kind of difficult. So if we wait until our wing saddle is a little bit dry there, our wing saddle actually sits on top of the fuselage, and that'll help us decide if things are lined up correctly. So when I go to put my fin and stabilizer on, I could use my wing saddle to help see if those are lined up. I don't want it tilted this way, I don't want it tilted this way, I want them directly in line. So I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the bottom center of my stabilizer here, just right down the middle. Make some Bob Ross happy trees. No, don't make Bob Ross happy trees on here. Notice the dowel is going to be the bottom of the fuselage, and the fin stabilizer and the wing saddle are going to go out the top. So I'm going to go ahead and line it up with the very back of the fuselage there, and I'm also going to align it so that it is in line with the saddle. And it's a little hard for me to see it while showing you, so I'm going to kind of go back and forth here a little bit. Make sure I have that straight. And if we can set this against something to hold it like that while it dries, that's great. But if not, again, this glue will kind of set in about a minute or so that it'll hold its position as long as you don't put any force on it. While I'm holding that, I can use my glue and put an extra dot of glue on my trailing edge here so that it's set for a little while. I can put just a little dot at each trailing edge where it meets the trailing edge strip and just help reinforce that a little bit. Wipe off the excess glue. And this guy now will pretty much stay put on its own there. You can sort of monitor it and make sure it's staying straight. I'm actually maybe degree or two off from my fin to my stabilizer. They didn't quite dry correctly. So we want to get as straight as possible. If it's not quite 90 degrees, you'll still be okay. That didn't quite come out perfectly. But that's able to hold its own now, it looks like. I might set this down off the edge of the table here a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here while I let this dry, and then we'll pull it off the sheet, and then we'll talk about covering the wings and joining them together.